On the stage of Carnegie Hall, Holiday stood alone. Her voice was no longer what it once was. While singing God Bless the Child, she suddenly stopped and sat down in a chair. The hall held its breath. No one moved. But what Holiday did in that silence would create one of the most touching moments in music history. An elderly pianist sitting among the audience couldn't hold back his tears. "I witnessed true art," he whispered. Lady Day's legacy was being born that night. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to hear this extraordinary story to the end and learn the complete tale of Lady Day's final gift. Because what happened that night at Carnegie Hall changed not only music history, but the lives of everyone who was there forever. Just 4 months before Billie Holiday's death, her ability to stand on New York's most prestigious stage was itself a miracle. Lady Day was better known at that time for her days spent in hospital beds. Cirrhosis was slowly consuming her body, while that mesmerizing voice of old now lived only in memories. But on the night of March 13, 1959, when Carnegie Hall's doors opened for Holiday one last time, no one was aware of the miracle that would unfold that evening. The Holiday of those days was very different from young Eleanora Fagan, who had been discovered in Harlem in the 1930s. 44-year-old Holiday looked much older than her years. Years of heroin addiction, alcohol use, and cirrhosis had consumed her body. But the most painful thing was the change in her voice. That voice, once crystal clear, was now hoarse and broken. Even breathing was difficult for her. Doctors had advised her to quit stage performances. But for Holiday, music was more important than life itself. Earlier that year, Holiday's manager Joe Glazer had planned to organize a farewell concert for her at Carnegie Hall. This wasn't just any concert. It would be the last major performance of Holiday's music career. Glazer knew Holiday's condition and wanted this concert to be both a final gift and a farewell opportunity for her. Carnegie Hall was America's most prestigious concert hall and would be the perfect final stage for a legend like Holiday. Norman Granz, Holiday's producer at the time, was extremely worried about her condition before the concert. Granz had been working with Holiday since 1952 and had witnessed both her rise and decline. Billie wasn't in any condition to perform that night, he would confess years later. "I called her starting at 10 in the morning, but she wouldn't answer the phone. I went to her hotel in the afternoon and she barely opened the door. Her face was pale, her hands were shaking, but there was that stubborn light in her eyes. 'Norman,' she said, 'this is my last chance. People want to see me, and I want to see them.'" Granz's concerns were justified because Holiday's stage performances had been getting shorter in recent weeks, and the tremor in her voice was becoming more pronounced. A few weeks earlier, she had performed at a club in Boston and had run out of breath in the middle of a song. That night, the audience had watched with concern as Holiday gripped the microphone stand. But even that night, Holiday's voice still carried that unique emotional intensity. Granz knew that despite Holiday's declining physical strength, her musical impact had never diminished. What happened in Holiday's dressing room on the afternoon of the concert was also noteworthy. Maud Russell, the makeup artist and stylist who had worked with Holiday for many years, would never forget that day. "Billie was very different that day," she would recount years later. "Usually she would be nervous before concerts, constantly moving around, but she was very calm that day. It was as if she had accepted her fate. While pinning the white gardenia in her hair, she looked at herself in the mirror for a long time and said, 'This might be the last one, Maud, but it'll be a beautiful ending.'" When the stage lights came on at 8 o'clock that night, even Holiday's entrance onto the stage was dramatic. The vast stage of Carnegie Hall made Holiday appear even smaller. Lady Day, who once walked with confident steps, now calculated each step. The famous white gardenia flower had taken its place in her hair, completing that iconic look. Gardenias had special meaning for Holiday. They weren't just stage accessories, but part of her identity. She had first started wearing gardenias in her hair in the 1930s, and since then these flowers had become her signature. But the 2,847 people looking at the stage immediately noticed that the woman standing before them was now just a shadow of her former self. Holiday's evening dress, unlike the clothes that once fit her body perfectly, now hung loose on her. The weight loss was very apparent. Her hands, those hands that once held the microphone with such confidence, now trembled slightly. But the expression on her face was full of determination. Holiday was going to do what she loved one last time that night, and she was determined to do it properly. Among the audience members were important names from the music world. Tony Bennett, one of Frank Sinatra's close friends, was sitting in the front rows. Bennett had first heard Holiday in the 1950s and had been very impressed by her. That night, as he watched Holiday, he was also thinking about his own musical journey. Artie Shaw, one of the legends of the jazz world, was also there. Shaw had worked with Holiday in the 1930s and was one of the first to discover her talent. That night, Shaw's eyes held both nostalgia and concern. Holiday began the concert with Fine and Mellow. This song, which she had written in 1939, was one of the most comfortable pieces in her repertoire. The lyrics of the song drew inspiration from Holiday's own life experiences, and she always felt at home when singing it. But even with this simple melody, she struggled to keep up that night. When she sang the first notes, everyone in the hall immediately noticed the change in her voice. That old velvety tone was gone. In its place had come a more fragile, more human voice. Jimmy Rowles, the musician at the piano that night, had been working with Holiday for many years. Rowles could detect even the slightest changes in Holiday's voice. He would never forget the shock he experienced that night. Her voice was completely different. That old powerful velvety tone was gone, but something else had taken its place. It was as if every word was filtered through pain. But this was beautiful pain. It was as if Holiday was transforming everything she had experienced into music. Rowles had also noticed how Holiday kept time. In the old days, Holiday would feel the rhythm perfectly and surrender herself to the flow of the music. But that night she was singing each note thoughtfully, as if she were singing each word for the last time, as if she were engraving each note in her memory. This added a different depth to her performance. The audience had immediately noticed this change too. The silence in the hall was striking. People seemed afraid even to breathe. Every word Holiday sang was listened to as if it might be her last. An elderly jazz fan in the front rows whispered to his friend, "This isn't Billie's voice, but it's Billie's soul." These words perfectly summarized the essence of that evening's performance. Holiday's voice had changed, but her spirit, her love for music, and her emotional depth had never changed. But this was just the beginning. Everyone wondered how Holiday would continue. They were still at the beginning of the concert, and it was unclear what Holiday's energy would be like. The real miracle had not yet happened. When the second song, I Loves You Porgy, came, Holiday's voice became even more fragile. This song had come from George Gershwin's opera Porgy and Bess, and was one of Holiday's favorite pieces. The emotional intensity of the song paralleled Holiday's own life story. But that night her breath was cut short at the highest notes of the song, and she had to hold on to the microphone stand. This moment worried everyone in the hall. Even the musicians didn't know what to do. Jimmy Rowles was trying to understand Holiday's condition. Should they stop the song or should they continue? Holiday's gestures and expressions were unclear. But then Holiday pulled herself together and continued with the song. Her voice was still broken, but her determination was evident. The tension in the hall was increasing. Some audience members had started exchanging worried glances. Most were afraid that Holiday would leave the stage. But Holiday didn't give up. Her determination also affected the audience. People were witnessing Holiday's struggle and wanted to support her. Among them was former music critic Leonard Feather. Feather had been following Holiday since the 1930s and had witnessed all the turning points in her career. He would later describe what he experienced that night as Holiday's most courageous performance. Billie wasn't just singing that night. She was trying to survive, and she was doing it through music. Holiday had chosen Lady Sings the Blues as her third song. This song held special meaning for her because the story of the Lady Day nickname given to her by Lester Young had begun with this song. Young and Holiday's friendship was one of the most beautiful friendships in jazz history. The two had met in the Count Basie Orchestra in the 1930s, and a deep musical and emotional bond had formed between them. But that night, Young was no longer alive. He had passed away just 4 months earlier, on March 15, 1959. Holiday was still carrying the pain of losing her closest friend. Young's death had deeply shaken Holiday, because he was one of the people who understood her best. The musical communication between them was so strong that in pieces where Young played saxophone, Holiday's vocals created harmony as if they were a single instrument. The letters Holiday wrote after Young's death showed how she experienced this loss. In a letter to one of her close friends, she had said, "When Lester left, a part of my music left too. He could hear things in my voice that I couldn't hear. No one can understand me that well anymore." That night, while singing Lady Sings the Blues, Holiday seemed to be talking to Young. Every word in the song's lyrics was a reference to the years they had spent together. Holiday's eyes were half closed, and as if she could see Young, she was looking at a corner of the stage. The audience could feel this emotional intensity, but they didn't know the reason. In the middle of the song, Holiday suddenly stopped. This was surprising for everyone because they were halfway through the song. Holiday moved away from the microphone and headed toward the chair standing in the middle of the stage. This sudden stop was so unexpected that Jimmy Rowles at the piano didn't know what to do. The music stopped and the hall fell silent. The audience couldn't understand what was happening. This wasn't part of Holiday's known performance style. Lady Day never sat down in the middle of concerts. She was a performance artist who filled the stage, who mesmerized audiences with her energy. But that night, everything was different. Holiday's behavior had surprised both the audience and the musicians. When she sat down in the chair, the expression on Holiday's face affected the entire hall. This wasn't just fatigue. Tears began to gather in her eyes. She placed her hands on her knees and slightly bowed her head forward. This movement showed not that she was trying to surrender, but that she was trying to gather the pain inside her. It was as if all the pain she had experienced had descended upon her at that moment. Holiday's condition at that moment laid bare all the difficulties she had experienced. The physical pain from cirrhosis was just one of them. The emotional devastation from losing Lester Young, the exhaustion from years of addiction struggles, FBI harassment, the racism she experienced, heartbreaks. All of these seemed to have descended upon Holiday's shoulders at that moment. The silence in the hall was so deep that people were afraid to breathe. 2,847 people were looking at the woman sitting before them and feeling her pain. This was no longer just a music performance. This was a journey into the depths of a human soul. In those moments, Tony Bennett felt his respect for Holiday increase even more. Billie showed us at that moment that she wasn't just a singer, he would recall years later. She was a human being who carried all the pain and beauty of life within her, and that night she shared all of that with us. That night's performance of Strange Fruit became one of the most touching performances of Holiday's career. Her voice was broken, her breath was cutting short, but every word seemed to come from her soul. In the final lines of the song, Black Bodies Swinging in the Southern Breeze, Holiday's voice completely broke. She could no longer sing. But the people in the hall didn't see this moment Holiday was experiencing as just a performance problem. They understood that they were witnessing America's greatest jazz vocalist's attempt to transform all the pain she had experienced into music. Every broken note of Holiday's was an expression not only of her illness but of all the injustices she had experienced. Tony Bennett, one of Frank Sinatra's close friends, was sitting in the front rows of the hall that night. In an interview he would give years later, he would describe those moments like this. When Billie's voice broke, everyone in the hall felt her pain, but at the same time, we saw her strength. She was showing us the healing power of music. When Holiday finished Strange Fruit, the hall was in complete silence. No one was moving. Holiday moved away from the microphone and sat back down in her chair. She had covered her face with her hands. At that moment, everyone thought Holiday had ended the concert. But then, Something unexpected happened. Someone from the back of the hall stood up. He began to applaud. Then another, then another. Within a few seconds, the entire hall was standing. But this wasn't normal applause. This was a show of respect, a thank you applause. When Holiday raised her head and looked at the hall, the scene she saw deeply moved her. 2,847 people were standing and applauding, but even the sound of the applause was different. It wasn't triumphant applause, it was loving applause. People were thanking Holiday not for what she had given them, but for what she had given them. This applause lasted exactly 4 minutes. During this time, Holiday sat in her chair watching the audience with tears in her eyes. Most of the men in the hall were crying. 67-year-old jazz critic Leonard Feather wrote what he experienced that night in his diary. "I have never seen anything like this in my life. Billie Holiday showed us that music is not just sound, but soul." The hall had fallen completely silent. 2,847 people held their breath, watching Holiday. No one knew what to do. This silence felt like it lasted for minutes, but it was actually only a few seconds. During those seconds, the same questions went through everyone's mind. Would the concert end? Would Holiday leave the stage? Would this legendary career end like this? The architecture of Carnegie Hall made this silence even more impressive. The acoustics of the hall were so perfect that even Holiday's breathing could be heard. Small movements among the audience members echoed. Someone's cough, someone else's chair creak. These sounds increased the tension even more. But then something unexpected happened. Holiday, sitting in her chair, slowly raised her head and looked at the audience. This movement was slow, deliberate. The tears in her eyes had not yet dried, but a different expression had appeared on her face. This wasn't the expression of the details that occurred in the hall during that 4-minute applause once again proved Holiday's place in the music world. From the front rows, Artie Shaw, Holiday's former music partner, was standing. Shaw had worked with Holiday in the 1930s and was one of the first to discover her talent. That night he wasn't hiding his tears. A young musician sitting in the middle of the hall was showing his admiration for Holiday through hand gestures. This young man, as would later be learned, was Tony Williams, who would later gain fame with Miles Davis's group. Williams would never forget that night and would always carry Holiday's influence in his own music. While the applause continued, Holiday got up from her chair and walked toward the audience. When she reached the edge of the stage, she made eye contact with people in the front rows. The love and respect she saw in each of their eyes deeply affected her. Holiday realized at that moment that music wasn't just sound, but a bridge that reached from soul to soul. Today, when that Carnegie Hall concert is remembered, people don't remember Holiday's broken voice, but her unbreakable spirit. The courage and dignity she showed that night defined what it means to be a true artist. Holiday didn't just sing, she lived, felt, and shared. The recordings of that final performance have survived to this day and are still being listened to. They create the same effect in every listener. When people hear the fragility in Holiday's voice, they also embrace their own fragility. They understand the healing power of music. Lady Day's legacy reached its peak at that final Carnegie Hall concert. Because that night, it was proven that music is not just sound, but also soul, courage, and love. The 4-minute applause Holiday received was a salute not just to that night, but to her entire life and music. And even today, when Holiday's final performance is remembered, hearts still beat the same way, eyes still tear up the same way, because true music defies time and lives forever, just like Lady Day did. Holiday's final performance wasn't just a concert, it was also the birth of a legacy. The love and respect she received from the audience that night reminded Holiday that music was immortal. Her broken voice, her sick body didn't matter. What mattered was music's power to touch souls. Years later, the musicians who were there that night would show Holiday's influence in their own works. Tony Williams's drumming, Artie Shaw's orchestral arrangements, even Tony Bennett's vocal techniques, All of them carried traces of Holiday's final performance. That 4-minute applause became one of the most meaningful moments in music history, because that applause wasn't just appreciation for a performance. It was a salute to the triumph of life, music, and the human spirit. Holiday had stood up that night despite her illness, her pain, and everything she had experienced, and had given her final gift to her audience. The people leaving Carnegie Hall were trying to understand what they had experienced that night. Most felt as if they had witnessed a sacred moment. Holiday's performance wasn't just music. It was a demonstration of the power of the human spirit. In the following days, New York newspapers interpreted Holiday's performance in different ways. Some focused only on technical shortcomings, but most acknowledged that the night was special. The New York Times music critic wrote in his article titled "Lady Day's Final Gift," "Billie Holiday showed us last night that music isn't just about perfect voices. Sometimes the most powerful music is born in broken hearts." Just 4 months after Holiday's performance, she passed away on July 17, 1959. But that final Carnegie Hall concert was remembered as one of the most touching moments in music history. Most of the people who were in the hall that night never forgot what they experienced. When the 4-minute applause ended, Holiday returned to the microphone. But this time it was different. It was as if she had been reborn. The love the audience had given her had healed her. She chose "I'll Be Seeing You" as her final song. This song held a special place in her repertoire because it was both a farewell song and a song of hope. When Holiday sang this song, her voice seemed to return to normal. Of course, it wasn't at its old strength, but it wasn't broken anymore either. It was as if the energy she received from the audience had given her new breath. While singing the final words of the song, "I'll be seeing you in all the old familiar places," a slight smile appeared on Holiday's face. This smile affected everyone in the hall, because everyone knew that Holiday's health condition was poor, and this would probably be the last time they would see her. But Holiday was telling them that they shouldn't be sad, that music would live forever. When the song ended, Holiday leaned into the microphone and simply said, "Thank you." These 2 words echoed throughout the hall. Then she left the stage. She didn't return. This was her final performance.